Welcome everyone. We're excited to be here. My name is Melissa Ward. I'm a doctoral student at Mary Lou Fulton's College at Arizona State University. And I work with some different students and with Punya Mishra here on a group work we call Talking About Design. And we have a website, talkingaboutdesign.com, where we just write about design as we see it in education and such. So we were really excited because at Arizona State University, they created the Sundevil Learning Lab once schools were closed to help our teacher candidates get their certification hours and to get practice. And so it was just a very rapid and quick design. And we're very interested in how it happened. So we invited two people here today to talk about it and tell us about the formation and the design of it and the challenges and successes they found. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Jodie Donner, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jodie Donner, and my title is Lead Technology Strategist and Head of Ignited Labs in the Office of Scholarship and Innovation at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I'm glad to be here and excited to talk about this.
Excellent. And Stuart Rice?
Yeah, so Stuart Rice, Director of Digital Initiatives at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College in the Office of Digital Learning. And super excited to be here to talk more about Sundevil Learning Labs.
Awesome. And then we also have Punya Mishra here. Do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Unmute, sorry about that. I'm Punya Mishra. I'm Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation, and just happy to be here and just glad to see talking about design continuing from a grad class that we had done together almost 1 year and a half, 2 years now. So really just happy to be here and just glad to be able to hear from Jodie and Stuart about Sundevil Learning Labs, because I think it's an incredible, interesting case study for us, those of us who are interested in design, to look at the different layers of design and the ways it played out and the work that went into that. So I'll just shut up and let you take it from there.
Thank you so much. And those of you in YouTube, please introduce yourself on the chat. Let us know where you're from. We like seeing where everyone's from. And there's also going to be a link to a form you can go fill out if you want to stay updated on our events and other things like that. So with that, Jodie and Stuart, will you tell us about the story of Sundevil's Learning Lab?
Sure. So you might be aware that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that the pandemic created an interesting number of ruptures in the normal. And one of those ruptures in the normal was that our teacher candidates who were essentially engaging in the second half, their last semester of being in schools, learning their craft, suddenly, many of them had no sites to go to. And how would they be able to finish out their semester and demonstrate and apply their skills that they had learned in some sort of environment that was as close to authentic as we could make it? And so this represented, a real challenge and then also a real opportunity. And so the Office of Professional Experience, which oversees this, started to develop the idea around Sundevil Learning Labs as an opportunity for students, first and foremost, to be able to lesson plan and deploy their lessons. But then once they sort of reached out to Jodie and I, it started to take on a life of its own, a very exciting life of its own. And Jodie, do you want to take it from there? Because this is really where the story gets good.
Sure. Well, it's now a bit of institutional lore already that the first large meeting occurred on a Tuesday. And we worked through the rest of that week and weekend, getting everything up and running with a lot of amazing collaborative teamwork. And I have student workers who work in the Ignited Labs, which are emerging technology labs across 3 different campuses. And of course, at that time, we were all remote. And I had already asked Stuart, worrying about my students' job security, if they could potentially assist him with any projects. So that was already happening. And so I don't know, I think just things just all kind of converged very well at the right time. And so it came to be that we were discussing how could we uphold the technical element for these teacher candidates to be able to teach. And we started having these discussions, of course, about the technologies that we already had access to, being Zoom, and then potentially we had one YouTube channel at that point for the college, and YouTube channels. And Stuart, I recall there were some times when you mentioned that you were going to perhaps make some decisions and then ask for forgiveness later, something to that effect, with setting up channels and getting everything running with YouTube. And so just kind of, I don't know, it was very different because we had different streams working on the side, but also good communication among these streams. So I was collaborating with my student workers to do all of this testing. We could possibly figure out how can we make this work so we can have the teacher candidates teaching and then potentially have an audience of some type, and then also have their normal faculty members assisting. And so that's really what we built between that Tuesday and Sunday. And then by Monday, 6 days. And although some will claim it was, I think 4 was the lowest number that I've heard. Yeah. And so then by Monday, we were ready for a soft launch, which, you know, actually went pretty well, considering a lot of it was, well, let's see how this works. Let's see what happens. And, you know, we had to deal with the 20-second delay between Zoom, broadcasting from Zoom to YouTube, and a number of pieces. I could keep going on. So Stuart, please chime in on anything you would like to add to that.
No, I think that's awesome. And I think it really encapsulates the fact that there's many ways to tell that story, but a lot of the story is so much about, right, the students, right, the teacher candidates from the Teachers College taking the responsibility for developing lessons, presenting lessons, the educational and technology champions from the Ignited Labs taking on the responsibility for really producing the streams and content. And so, I mean, what we ended up doing is we ended up setting up a student-run web-based public broadcasting system, right, in 6 days, really delivering educational content to, you know, a potentially infinitely scalable audience really very quickly. And whether it ends up being, you know, the Lord changes it to 3 days or 6 days, like it nevertheless represents this kind of amazing synergy of people and process and technologies that we're all able to come together in really record speed and with no friction. And that's really the amazing part of it all. So
if I can ask a question here, because I think what needs to be understood that this is like the first 2 weeks of ASU shutting down its sort of, you know, face-to-face teaching, office, everything. So we are in that disruption of everybody just suddenly figuring out how to work from home, new rhythms, new systems. How many people were at the back end of it? So how many technology, you know, champions were there? How many people from Office of Scholarship? How many people from this? How many people from marketing? I mean, I just want to get people a sense of that all of these people had to coordinate, even while figuring out what this rupture that Stuart so appropriately described.
Yeah, I mean, from when you add in all of the players, and I mean, what we're talking about here is we're talking about this teacher candidates, we're talking about faculty members who are site leads for districts. We're talking about the Office of Professional Experience Core Group, marketing, the Office of Scholarship Innovation, the Office of Digital Learning, the University Technology Office. I mean, you're talking about literally a team of over 100 people, non-co-located, in 6 days, right, coming up with a solution with again, remarkably, it took us maybe less than 2 or 3 meetings to all be going in the same direction with the same mission and the same desire for a positive outcome. So, I mean, I guess you're absolutely right, Punya, when you think about it. Like, we would be hard pressed, I think, to do this with 100 people on campus. Like that would be a miracle. But to do it in such a distributed way, when all of us, of course, had multiple mandates, right? This was certainly not the only thing that was our attention was given to, but we were able to do this, like to literally launch this in 6 days, and by maximizing really each of our strengths and working collaboratively on it.
Absolutely. And I want to mention a little bit more about numbers. I believe this is estimated that we had roughly 25 site leads that Stuart mentioned. And I was looking at, thinking about the 5 spaces of design and looking at processes, for example. And, we had a lot of shifts in processes and shifts in titles and things. So what we used to call site leads would be those faculty members who are designated to assist with those teacher candidates out at local sites. Then they became lab leads because they were then working in this online lab space with their teacher candidates. And those teacher candidates numbered roughly around 300. And just behind the scenes for that, they had all come together virtually, of course, away from their normal assigned locations and normal assigned faculty. So there are more of those site leads who actually didn't participate in the Sundevil Learning Labs piece. They either chose not to, or their local districts actually had their teacher candidates doing something else. So they were still teaching and getting their hours that they needed in some other way. So we also have this added element of teacher candidates working with faculty members with whom they maybe had never even collaborated or didn't know, perhaps, things like that. And then from my side, since I had the student worker element, those ETCs or educational technology champions, and we had these title changes again. They went from being ETCs, that's what we always called them, to producers. And so then they got into this realm of streaming, which luckily some of them, I really had to leverage some of their knowledge. Of course, I had one worker who was very knowledgeable in online gaming streaming, which we were able to then repurpose and use his knowledge and his expertise as we kind of were setting this up that first weekend. And I was so grateful to have his experience. And, he was very quick to send us to all of this information, like if YouTube was down, and I forget what that website is called, but if they have any outages, like he immediately was checking that, because we did run into those things happening a couple of times. So I had 7 of those ETC producers, and then one management intern who works with our team as a full-time employee, and one multimedia specialist who works on my team, which is the Tech Initiatives team in the Office of Scholarship and Innovation, and then one coordinator from the Office of Scholarship and Innovation. So, and those people were kind of part-time, filling the gaps, because the other element from my side, we were streaming from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We had these teacher candidates actually teaching with their lab leads in their ears. And by that, I mean in Zoom chat. So just imagine, separate locations, you're a TC, you're presenting a lesson, and you have to make sure that you're paying attention to that Zoom chat window, because your faculty member is telling you, remember to smile and make sure that you include wait time, pause for a bit, all these different coaching pieces that were going on that could happen. Actually, amazingly, you couldn't do that if you were in a classroom. You wouldn't have somebody telling you what to do. That wouldn't go so well. But you could have that as you were presenting as a teacher candidate. So I just think so many wonderful pieces came together, and we were just able to bring a lot of good elements together to, it wasn't 100% smooth. I make it sound like it was. But, we worked out so many pieces and so many obstacles that when we encountered them, that's another thing that I'd like to say. We were very able to address them quickly and come up with solutions and communicate those solutions and implement them. And Stuart, I don't know if that brings anything to mind that you might want to discuss.
I'd like to ask one question that came from our YouTube chat. Just so I want to get back to this processes and systems thing, because we talked about design at different levels. But just to clarify, because we have some people that are from other states and other universities, the teacher candidates, so these are these all in the final semester of their teaching program? Mm-hmm. And they had to plan the lessons, is that correct?
Yeah.
And teach them. What other details, like who was watching these videos?
Oh, good. Go ahead, Stuart, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so just as I think, just as a starting thing, so the teacher candidates had to plan their lessons on a daily basis, and again, it's hard to articulate just the level of pride and excitement that we had, because really, you're talking about people who have been trained to deliver in a classroom with children, right? None of these students had any background in digital pedagogy or digital presentation. So they literally were learning on the fly, right? So they had to create their lesson plans. They had to create their presentations. And then the site leads, which are now the lab leads, right, would be on the streams with them, right? They would be looking and coaching, and they could provide coaching beforehand. But a lot of what we tried to do, and this was really critical to the process, is the lab leads were observing, we had the ETCs observing, and we met for that first 2 weeks, I think, Jodie, every single day, right, after a live session to debrief with the staff that was involved, and then allow the staff to then communicate to their students that they were overseeing, lessons learned and guidance that we had, things that revolved around copyright or how to, ideas around presentation of materials. Like, it was this constant feedback loop. So the simple answer is yes, the TCs had the responsibility of coming up with their content and developing it with input from the lab leads. But I mean, it was wrapped in this, for lack of a better term, like a continuous process improvement model that we had to keep evolving what we were doing on literally a daily basis.
And how did you do that? How did you communicate and set, like, were there specific processes or systems in place that help you continually evolve this? Because you've got people working from home in all these different places. How did you communicate?
Yeah. Jodie, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And I do want to mention that regarding the audience of viewers, we had initially a lot of children of employees who were involved, especially in that soft launch, which was really great. And that was nice because we were able to send some photos through a Slack channel. So different than the lab leads could share that with their TCs, their teacher candidates, showing them that, children are watching this. Because I do want to say that the first goal was definitely just to ensure that these teacher candidates had a space to teach and for them to earn what they needed to get their degrees, receive that accreditation, et cetera. But then ultimately, because we had the marketing team involved and we had a website landing page, and then we had these videos streaming on YouTube, we did have a number of people from home who actually had their students, tuning in on a daily basis and watching the lessons and learning. And we had a number of anecdotal pieces of evidence telling us that what those students, those teacher candidates were presenting was in fact a lot better and a lot more engaging and very, very helpful compared to what their districts were providing them. And some of that we know is just because of the very quick transition and the fact that many of these districts just were not prepared for this type of shift. And so we were very, very glad to be able to do that. So crap, I forgot what was the question because then I got off on that whole audio piece.
And let me just clarify one thing too. So the K-12 kids were actually watching on YouTube. So you can, like, right now, even during this, we are talking on Zoom, but we're streaming it to YouTube. So that's how they did it. The teacher candidates were on Zoom, and then they also had their coaches, I can't remember what you called them, on Zoom, except they didn't have their camera on. So the children on YouTube did not see the coaches on. But the coaches, but the coaches can put things in the Zoom chat that only the teacher candidates could see.
Yep.
And so from the student end, they're just watching a YouTube stream, kind of like our audience right now is watching, while the teacher candidates and their coaches are on Zoom managing that. And that's a really interesting importance about that the coaches could be right there with the teachers without the students knowing.
Really so there is one more layer to this though. And the other layer to this is the tech infrastructure and the ETCs who are, because think about what's going on. I mean, I'm just trying to put myself, and maybe you guys can speak to it better, but you have to switch between one channel to the YouTube to the next every 30 minutes because teacher A is in Timbuktu, teacher B is in Phoenix, Arizona, the faculty is somewhere else, the ETCs individually are somewhere else, and it's all happening through this web portal. Right. And so coming back to this question of processes and systems, having those down pat so that at this point you're going to switch the Zoom channel from this onto the YouTube, and then when that is done, the next one. So that's another layer to the system. So it's not just getting teacher candidates connected with the faculty, it's teacher candidates connected with faculty, scaffolded by ETCs through this website.
Yeah, and that makes me think of, I remembered what you were asking about was this processes and systems and how we were able to make changes so quickly and to iterate and communication wise, et cetera. So we had a lot of different things, but the primary piece would be shared Google Documents. I mean, that's at the core of this collaboration. We had it changed. So initially we had one version of a production schedule, basically. And so it was by grade level, and each grade level had 2 lab leads assigned and 1 ETC assigned. But remember, ETCs are students and they still actually had classes going on, right? So they might have to drop out from 1 to 2:15 because they had to go attend class. And that's really where we had our management intern and our coordinator and our multimedia specialist come in as backups. And I even had to do a backup once, which I'll tell you what, I was like super stressed and worried that I was going to screw something up because, here, there are a lot of pieces to manage between, as when you said, the Zoom call and making sure that you are streaming it on YouTube, and you're trying to communicate with these teacher candidates as an ETC and the lab lead as well through chat, because you've got a live stream going on YouTube. So you don't want to be saying something or, showing something that would be inappropriate, or, you don't want to have a teacher candidate getting coached, obviously, through this live version that's being streamed. So we had that first initial schedule, which makes me think of the artifacts, because we definitely had this evolution. Then my management intern, she created a better schedule that was just nicer, cleaner, easier to manage. And then each grade level had the same Zoom link that eventually then went to YouTube, of course. So everybody could come into that same link. It was static and nobody had to worry about that. So that was in that schedule. And then we allowed the TCs, we asked them to provide a little bit of discussion about what they were going to be presenting for those 45 minutes roughly, and their students. So some of them struggled a bit with time management. So they maybe were supposed to present a 45-minute lesson, and my ETCs would say, wow, it's 25 minutes in and they're already done. So, there were some filler things that went on, some brain breaks, lots of yoga, lots of playing of instruments, and copyright, which was the bane of our existence that we discovered. Some of these TCs wanted to just stream some videos that they could easily find, educational videos online on YouTube, which you can't actually stream somebody else's YouTube channel through your YouTube channel without permission. And even if you had permission.
Oh yeah, you couldn't do that even if you had permission, because exactly. I gave you permission for that silly thing that my daughter and I created, right. And that got slapped down by YouTube. It's like, yeah. I made it for Sundevils Learning Lab and you can't show it.
Nope.
But before we go into the systems, I want to actually, you mentioned a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned Google Docs, of course, Zoom's come up multiple times, YouTube's come up. What were some of the other tools or technologies which were essential to making this happen? I mean, what else were you using internally to communicate and work?
Well, from my side, Slack. So that's an area that not many people, I guess, are privy to, because this was the conversations or the conversation among ETCs, those producers. So, and it would be really great for us to cultivate and go through and just analyze all the conversation that they had in there, because it was such a mix of like fun workplace banter, but also struggling, issues, troubleshooting, helping, solving. It was true community. And some of them had that type of interaction before, but definitely not to that level. I mean, they were all constantly in it every day from roughly 8:30 a.m. until about 1 p.m. because that was the duration of the streaming for these lessons. And, somebody would pop in and say, good morning, happy Tuesday. Or at that point, we were not sure what day it was. Many of us, so some of us started posting like, today is this day. So we are aware of what was going on. And then I accidentally ran into posting an awkward GIF that was just really weird. And so then I decided every day I had to contribute my awkward GIF of the day. So that was also a little bit of fun. And it was just great because, they could show their stresses, maybe 9 a.m. we were supposed to start, and 8:59, and one of the ETCs would be posting, the teacher candidate hasn't logged into Zoom yet. What do I do? And, a lot of different pieces like that. So for us, Slack was it was where everything happened for us. And I guess it's kind of the age range I'm working with. These are all students. They're used to Slack, et cetera, for my student workers. And plus that really was our communication piece anyway. But it was just so nice because I know I could put anything in there. We had a dedicated channel called SDLL_support. Everything went on in there. And I could ask anything and immediately get a response. And that's really what made it work. Like there was no waiting. And then also for my communication to Stuart's side was through Slack as well. And I could do the same thing where I would just, ask him a question and immediately get an answer. It was just so useful, and it felt so amazing to know that I was getting responses and to continue the work without any obstacles of waiting.
It's really interesting because, this talking about design group, we look at a framework where we talk about design, right? From artifacts and then processes, experiences, systems, and culture. And so I hear all of that in what you were just talking about, because it's like you had a culture established, and even things like when you would upload awkward GIFs or something, that does something to the culture, right? That makes something fun. We should have asked for
Jodie to share those with us today.
I know. Maybe we'll put a special post on our website that is Jodie's awkward GIFs.
I'm happy to oblige.
But it fed into like the experience your workers and your students were having around it, and the systems, how you were communicating across different networks. And it put in a process. If there was a problem, what would happen? And all those things were supported by this artifact, which was Slack in this case, which is pretty amazing how that all worked together.
Mm-hmm.
So
I really have a question, but
no, that's cool. Thank you. And given that framework, right? I mean, one of the things which is most interesting to me, and I was sort of involved more in the initial discussions while this was an emergent idea, and after that was more in the background, just sitting back and marveling and responding to some Slack stuff that would pop in once in a while. But one of the interesting things for me as like an academic was how different systems were sort of colliding in this process. So one would be, for instance, I know originally the idea was to go with a Zoom webinar, but that was scratched. So I would love for you to talk about why you chose to go the YouTube way, because there was, at some level, one could argue that the fact that the TCs couldn't get feedback from the learners was experientially problematic, but there were other issues involved. So we would love for you to talk a little bit about that. And the second one, something, Jodie, that you did allude to already, is this whole copyright issue, where videos would be taken down for a variety of reasons. And that is inherently a conflict between what is educational fair use versus broadcast fair use, right? So would love to hear you talk about those two aspects of systems there. So one is the decision to go from Zoom to YouTube and what was involved in that, because I think those are also system level issues. And then the next one about the YouTube pulling videos down.
Yeah. So I think that just to sort of speak to the choice, so one of the things that we discovered very quickly when we were discussing this in the Zoom perspective was that in order to do this, we would need webinar accounts. Webinar accounts would allow us to have potentially much larger audiences, and it would provide far more control over things like chat and other things than we could get from a base Zoom account. The interesting thing, like a challenge, was that there's a finite number of these webinar accounts, and in that we have as a university, and of course, all of them started disappearing. So we first had to get the webinar accounts, which are separated by size that they admit. So we had to think about how could we get this? How could we deal with the fact that we had a finite number of webinar accounts? They'd be of different total audiences. And what if 1,000 people showed up? Like, we had no idea. We had no idea if one family would show up or 1,000. And then FERPA came into play, right? How do we protect the identities and the security of children, right, who are going to be potentially watching this? And so as we process like all of these intersecting realities at the institutional level, at a kind of policy level with FERPA and other things, is we determined that YouTube would actually allow us to reach people at scale, and at the same time, by connecting Zoom's webinar capacity to YouTube, we could then overcome any and all concerns around FERPA, because now it became a unidirectional experience. And thanks to the way YouTube is set up, any channel designated as for children automatically has the chat function disabled, right? So we were able to sort of solve all of these intersecting problems of capacity with Zoom webinar, issues around FERPA and protection both of the ETC or of the TCs, the ETCs, and the children who might be watching. And so the solution kind of emerged. It created brand new problems, of course, right? It created brand new problems, but it solved a lot of them, and it allowed us to learn a lot about how these systems intersect. We know more now about copyright and YouTube than we ever wanted to know. Jodie is now a hireable expert in YouTube copyright policy and can prevent your channel from getting strikes. That's right, Jodie. Right, that's one of your new superpowers. I can prevent copyright violations on your YouTube channel.
I can try, but I don't know if I can prevent. So a bit of background in our teacher prep courses. It's something that's kind of sprinkled throughout depending upon the course and the program, but in all programs, students have to go through digital citizenship modules. And they include a number of pieces, of course, about just operating, teaching, working with children in digital environment, such as FERPA, COPPA, SIPA, all those legal pieces. And copyright and fair use is also a big portion of it. But as Punya said, educational use in your own classroom, there are a variety of things that are totally fine and legal and allowed for you as an educator to show a bit of a clip of a YouTube video to your students and then have, some type of engagement and practice, etc. around it. But that becomes entirely different if you are streaming that and it's somebody else's content, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on some other online web-based platform. And now if you're trying to stream that through YouTube, YouTube is going to identify the algorithms are going to identify that it is a copyright violation, and you don't get a warning like saying, hey, you should watch it, your video stream just gets cut. And so that whole happened multiple times. And so, my ETC producers weren't expecting some of that. And so ultimately, we started seeing in this Slack channel, the video's gone, like we got taken down. What's going on? I can't get it back up and running. And then we started realizing all of these things. And some of it was, known to us, but not necessarily known to teacher candidates. So even a teacher candidate, we went through a multitude of, here, use these resources instead. You can't do this. Create your own content. And then we put out a call to a number of people. If you have, artistic video, you drawing something, painting something that maybe would engage students who are watching this, a third grader, for example, watching this lesson, and they can draw along, or they can make something, or they can hear music and, maybe see you playing the clarinet or whatever it might be. Or something that was allowed was reading aloud books, different stories, etc. That was all being, that was okay. We weren't getting taken down for that. But even at that point, it was still really tough because some of these teacher candidates and even the lab leads didn't have that background or understanding of how YouTube works, understanding. And so I was kind of doing these, ad hoc teaching on the fly, teaching copyright and fair use. My background, I used to be a librarian, a high school librarian. So I'm very familiar with these pieces anyway. But one thing that also came out of this is that we understood that in our teacher prep programs, maybe we're not teaching copyright and fair use and digital citizenship elements well, or, in the right vein, considering what we learned from this. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I think partly it is you were teaching them for the context that you were preparing them for.
Right.
And then the rug got pulled out from under all of us. And suddenly, we are preparing teachers to go and teach in a classroom of 10 kids, 30 kids, 100 kids, whatever it may be, but that's a different environment. Then suddenly now ASU or MLFTC or the Sundevils Learning Labs became a broadcaster.
Right.
And suddenly we are playing in a completely different playing field than what we were used to playing. So I'm not surprised by those kinds of things raising their head, because even a person who was well versed in the educational fair use was going to get tripped up the moment you started teaching online.
You're right. But I think part of it was that we realized that even at just the basic core of, someone's intellectual property or someone's creations, that's a piece that, especially I think with online access for so many things, images, digital content of any kind, it's still tough for students to understand. Someone created that. Someone put the time and effort into it. You can't just take it. And I think that was my concern, is that even after we explained multiple times, this person created this. And so if you're taking, financial gain from them, then that's a violation of copyright. Like they weren't really understanding that. And so that's where I don't think it has to be a rehaul or revamp or anything like that. But I think we still need to get that message across to them that it also applies to what they do. Their lesson plans that they create, all of their original content, that is theirs. And so that cannot just be taken and remixed and reused or replayed without their consent. And so, yes, they know about Creative Commons and things, but maybe, we need to solidify that a little bit more and change what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at some of the questions that we're getting from the chat and some different people there. And I'm wondering if we can learn more about the teacher's experience, the teacher candidates' experiences in this, and what kind of progress you think that they might have made, or what assets or characteristics that they maybe gained that might help them in the future. Just as an idea for other universities who might, in the fall, there might still be schools closed. They might be looking to do things like this. And it's a valuable skill for teacher candidates to learn to teach online right now. What was their experience like, and how did you support them?
I'm gonna toss that one to you, Jodie, just because I think you and your team were literally in the trenches with them every day. So my sense of it is a little bit more anecdotal, but Jodie, I think you have a really close sense of this.
Okay. I wanted to give you a chance if you had anything to say, but I have definitely some ideas. One thing I really want to mention is so many of these lab leads said that they had viewed some of their teacher candidates in the classroom struggling a little bit and maybe feeling not that confident and having some issues with presenting live to students. And when they switched to this different medium, and granted they were basically teaching to a camera but still instituting all of these different pedagogical instructional strategies, pausing, wait time, working on engagement, talking to students whom they couldn't even see. They could not see any reactions from any students. They couldn't see also somebody not paying attention, for example, which is what would happen in a real classroom. So in a way, it's like you just assume everybody's at home following along. So you're teaching.
It's like defensive teaching.
Yes. And so many lab leads said they saw some of these teacher candidates just grow and shine. And this was an unbelievable change for them, a shift for them to become more confident, more successful, to feel as though they had ownership and they were doing a really good job, which is interesting because they weren't getting immediate feedback from anyone, except maybe in the Zoom chat window. They were getting a little bit of feedback from their lab lead who was, commenting and commending and saying positive things and giving them praise, etc. So I think that's a really neat piece. And we're in, a lot of discussions about continuing for summer and continuing for fall because of this unknown and learning what will be better. So, my suggestion baseline, and there are tons of them, but first would be that a live version is really, really difficult to pull off, and pre-recorded and then broadcasted videos would be much better. So, having, and we've talked about an on-demand playlist of lessons that teacher candidates have created with supplemental resources and materials and a facilitation guide or a learning guide that goes along with it. That would be probably a lot better piece. And then, really this new digital pedagogy model should be part of teacher preparation, probably from here on out, because there's going to be more of these types of situations. And that's a good thing because it's a different way to teach, which I think we could all discuss for a while, how much we need to change education and some of the things that have been in place for a long time that haven't adjusted. Who knew it was going to take a pandemic to kind of drive that? But
sure.
I think that's
so there are a couple of comments here in the YouTube channel. So one is, do students who delivered these lessons, the teacher candidates, can they get access to do they have access to their videos? Because one of the comments was that, this could become part of their portfolio as they move forward. So I think that's a great suggestion. I don't know if you guys are doing that already, but I think that's a great suggestion. And the second thing that struck me, Jodie, as you were speaking, that if you go to a recorded version, there is another benefit to it as well. Because see, the thing is, it is a one-sided thing. So the people watching it, because then you could look at some way of opening a channel for the kids to come in, and whoever recorded that lesson could be available on that channel.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because now you are teaching, you can't be also monitoring the channel at the same time. But if the teaching piece is there, if we can think of some way of maintaining anonymity of the kid and, all that stuff, the teacher who's on from, let's say, 9:30 to 10 could be available on the channel to answer questions about the lesson, which they couldn't have done otherwise, and then you're off the hook also sort of this whole logistical thing of, moving from one channel to the other. Here you're working much more like a broadcaster, but you also have another possibility of conversation, which here was not possible.
Right.
So just a thought.
And I think even like if there was a way for the teacher candidates to watch children watch them might be interesting as well. And I am curious, like little meta level, but like how do the kids react? Like that's one thing that maybe is missing is that understanding of how that children actually are understanding this, because communicating with children does take some feedback sometimes to develop. So, and I was thinking, even in normal times, the possibility for teachers to video record a lesson and get feedback on it and watch it themselves again, if that can help them build their confidence and get some basic skills down, so they're not having to focus as much like that when they go into the classroom and they have to be responding to students, might be interesting. And I was just curious, do they have access to go back and watch their lessons again?
Right now they don't. I don't know, Stuart, are we gonna make that available? So marketing was involved a lot with the handling of all of that and, the archiving, etc. Stuart, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. One of the things that I think we made a decision, it was either informal or formally, that because we weren't planning on making or memorializing the recordings on YouTube, right, is because we were sensitive to the fact that teacher candidates, it's a double-edged sword, right? So if teacher candidates, if we posted their videos, right, this now becomes an artifact that a school district or a parent or anyone could look for, right? And this was a learning experience for these students. So we didn't publish out the YouTube videos. What we relied on was really the coaching from the the lab leads to really help the students sort of understand where they could improve, with a focus really on on their fundamental skills of planning and presenting a lesson. So I think first and foremost, looking at the core skills of like wait time and demonstration and those things. I think it would be exciting in sort of future iterations to think of it as part of the feedback context for how we help teacher candidates and future online teachers and pedagogues sort of reflect and review on their performance and improve from that.
And just a reminder for those watching in YouTube, there is a link. If you would like, we will try to get together a few more resources and information in the future. If you go and fill out the form that's going to be posted now in the chat, we'll use that to try to get you out more information and answer more questions as we go.
So question in terms of, I know there was some chatter discussion on Slack channel about how many viewers and that. So do you have any sense of that? And I know there was also a feedback form. What seems to have come out in that, and again, this is all very anecdotal, people don't necessarily feel the urge to go click a button and type stuff up. But I was just curious that if you, apart from sort of the internal experience, if you had some voices from the outside, both in terms of numbers, because there was something curious that New York, for some reason, this became popular in New York, relatively speaking. So maybe you can speak to that, sort of the numbers and also some of the feedback that you guys got.
So we were running, correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm understating numbers, Jodie. So we had 8 YouTube streams running, right, on 4 days a week. And when we introduced pre-K, that added a stream on Friday. So we broadcasted generally Monday through Thursday. We estimated that on a daily basis, we had around 1,800 to 2,000 viewers of our content, spread out across the United States, which I think, and one of the things I think anecdotally for people in school districts who might be looking at this as a potential solution, that it was clustered around the early grade level. So the K-5 range was really well attended, and I think that's a function of you're looking at a grade where parents can really, I think, get them in front of something. We had a lot of very endearing lessons around clockmaking and telling time. 7, 8, which was our widest range, was we have a feeling the kids watched maybe a day or two and then just ran away because they're 7th and 8th graders.
Because they can run away.
Because they can, because they know how to lock doors. But it was really gratifying to see those numbers on a daily basis. Jodie, is that your recollection as well?
I think that's right. And I know that I want to just make sure that everybody knows that wasn't like consistent watching necessarily, like 9 to 1. But yeah, those numbers definitely seem right.
And then from the feedback perspective, we did implement a system on the Sundevil Learning Lab's webpage where families could send us feedback. And from the feedback that we got, it was generally just positive gratitude for making it available. One of what we heard was that people appreciated the availability of a structure, right? That they could think about having something for their kids to do from a very specific time in the day. It was easy to set up. It was easy to watch. Originally, I think we had it was 9 to 2, so we had a lunchtime broadcast. So there was story time, which I think parents really appreciated. One of our staff members commented in terms of feedback that it gave their children a sense of schedule and structure again, which is really, as we all know in education, critical for kids is to have structure. And so to have, knowing that you were going to be doing English language arts at 9 and social studies at 10 and math at 11 and reading hour at noon, like this was just very helpful. And there was just a lot of appreciation that was being expressed.
So a couple of quick thoughts here. So one, this was never designed for the kids. Right? I mean, and just to be upfront, right? I mean, and you said that in the very beginning. I mean, this was designed so that our teacher candidates could meet their requirements for graduation. We did not want that a student's career would be held back. They couldn't graduate because we couldn't figure out a way. So to me, that's another wonderful piece about this design is that the solution that emerged, that you guys came up with, also had that added value to the broader community, to the kids and so on. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that a good solution doesn't just solve the problem immediately in front of it, but actually could have ramifications beyond that. So I think that's a really important thing to sort of understand there, because technically you need not have even streamed it to YouTube. You could have just left it at the TCs and the teacher observing them teach and be done with it. But I think that what made it authentic for the students, though, was they were not just performing for their faculty member, that they were actually, what they were doing was being streamed out, that actual people were watching it. I think that's what gave it that authenticity, but also ended up being a sort of a benefit. I think the other piece, which I think really stands out and which goes back to the stories that are emerging of this having been created in 6 hours flat or 6 days or whatever, because every time I hear Carol speak about it,
6 seconds.
It drops. It was like 6 days, and last I heard, like you said, it was 3 days. That it was at that point when the Sundevil Learning Lab came out. Now, there are lots of these things only people know. We've been through this for a while. Systems have, solutions have emerged. Public stations have stepped up, all kinds of things. For that moment, for many parents, this was the only thing. And I think that's something that has to be remembered as well. And that's, I think, goes back to the 6 days versus 3 days versus 1 hour point, is that because you guys turned it around so quick, it became a sort of a go-to thing for a lot of parents. Because everybody who was struggling had just stopped going to work and now was trying to figure out, how do I maintain my job while taking care of my kids and doing this, that, and the other. And I think that this came up at sort of the right moment. So I think those are the two pieces I wanted to sort of highlight, is that it was designed predominantly for one purpose, ended up having additional value, and that the timing of it also was amazingly right in that sense. So there's not a question, but more like a comment to just get some responses.
And can I add to it just a little bit, because the timing was good. you think sometimes they talk about building a plane while you're on it, right? So you got it out there. There were still tweaks you had to make as you were going, right? It wasn't in its final form when you released it, but you're willing to go with it, go with what you have, and use that for feedback to improve it. But it was still able to offer value to people while you were going, even though it wasn't in its full solidified form. So I think that's a really important part of this design and how this came about. What we mean when we talk about design too, being able to act and then learn from what we do versus waiting till something's completed to get it out there.
Absolutely. And go ahead, Stuart.
No, I think that this comes back to Punya's point. I mean, it's, we just kept pushing the envelope. I mean, that was the thing, right? Is like, I can remember in the early conversations we were in with the Office of Professional Experience, Jodie, it's like, Jodie now has a background that just has the word yes, because every meeting I would just keep saying, yes, we can do that. Of course we can do that. Like it was, we never said no to any part of the solution, right? It was always something that we could entertain. And I think if we had said, let's be safe, let's just do this really simple thing, we might have gotten inertia and not really pushed past that. But we really said, if we're going to do this, we might as well set up the first ever student-run Zoom webinar-based YouTube public access education channel in the country. Like, why not? Like, let's just do it that way, because, it seems, why not? We're already here. We might as well do that. So I think that's part of it too, and I think that goes back to the organizational culture and all that, is that, we just kept saying yes. It's kind of like improv. We just kept saying yes, and it led us to a solution, and we just kept saying yes after it went live. And this is why we're looking at Learning Labs 1.5 for the summer and 2.0 for the fall.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to say two things. First is that you set our channel topic of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College Sundevil Learning Lab channel in Slack to the answer is always yes. So right from the beginning, Stuart, you told us what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. So. Nice
culture design there.
Yeah, no doubt. He is the man for that, like ready to go and to set.
So there is another inadvertent fallout of the Sundevil Learning Labs, which I have to say, which is this mutual admiration society between Stuart and Jodie. I never talked to Stuart without him praising Jodie and vice versa. So I think that's, and I don't think that you guys had a chance to work together before this.
No, and now we're available for parties. So no, but
here we are.
That's just the way it is. It's, and Jodie, because I want to hear the other thing you were going to say, Jodie, but it's absolutely true. Like I think it's the function of the fact that we spent hours and hours together over the last few weeks. That didn't hurt. But yeah, no, it's totally awesome. What was your other side of comment, Jodie?
Yes, and I agree to all of that. I admire Stuart. I'm grateful to work with him anytime. But Sundevil Learning Labs 1.5, as he mentioned, we're discussing, and then 2.0 for the fall. And I want to talk about that evolution piece of design and how we have definitely changed and looked at what worked, what didn't work, and how can we adjust it. And as we mentioned, going to pre-recorded and rather than doing a live version, my excitement there is that our teacher candidates are going to learn valuable skills for digital pedagogy that they otherwise wouldn't have, because we're going to teach them how to create digital content that they can then utilize in a multitude of settings in whatever education may look like. And that is going to be so valuable for them and for their future students. And I'm really excited about that.
Absolutely. We just have another minute or so. For the people in the chat, we encourage you to fill out the survey, and we'll try to get more information out on our website, talkingaboutdesign.com. We'll do a follow-up post on this, and whatever resources we can steal from Jodie and Stuart and other people, we'll share them out. Whatever.
But Jodie's already shared a wonderful Google Doc where she's actually laid it out.
Yes, so we'll absolutely
flesh that out, and
right. So we'll share some of that information, whatever is appropriate. But just for the end, I guess you talked a little bit about what's next. I guess maybe just the final question is, what did you learn the most through this?
I heart you, Jodie. I mean, I think the thing is really for me, I mean, I say that I got to work. What did I learn? I learned really that I have amazing colleagues, right? And I think it's easy in any context to kind of be in your silo, right? I think that this was really an opportunity to say, there's like a whole group of us out there, right, who can come together, coalesce around problems and create really innovative solutions. So I think it really sliced through any sense of like being like the lone person trying to do something. Like when we connected all these people together, this is what we created. So if we can do this in 3 hours, imagine what we could do in 3 days. Kind of
Absolutely. And I think my feelings are somewhat similar. Just the communication and the responsiveness, it drove me and made me want to just continue and keep working and keep producing because things were going so well. You know, when you hit a roadblock or an obstacle, sometimes it's easy to just go, oh, okay, well, not everybody's in it the same way I'm in it. And I didn't ever experience that with this whole process. So it worked so well. And then, of course, I have to mention my student workers, my educational technology champions who have been just amazing on so many different levels, and trusting in them and allowing them to run the show. I did that, and it was great. And I look forward to obviously collaborating with them more and giving them more responsibility as well.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. This is really interesting. I think our feedback from the chat, they found that this really interesting too, and hopefully it'll help a lot of people.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.